Imagine for a moment you're me. You've just seen a matinee showing of Marty Supreme, and you rush home to enjoy an extended, non-public restroom experience. While on the toilet, you're still thinking about the movie, so you're scrolling through reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, Letterboxd, Twitter, when all of a sudden, you see this bald fuck take an even bigger dump on your screen.
Honestly, if you want to see a bunch of unlikable white characters competing against each other in a sport for all the wrong reasons, you can literally just watch Challengers. Unlikable white characters. Unlikable white characters. White characters. Which, why am I talking about it?
That's a very good question, and one I intend to answer in my response to Anthony Fantano's abysmal review of Marty Supreme. But first, I feel it's important to point out that Anthony frames his review as spoiler-free, and as such, doesn't discuss any of the plot points of Marty Supreme in detail. This was definitely a good move on his part, because if you've even read a synopsis of the film, it's clear Anthony's review makes zero sense. It's basically 15 minutes of fan fiction, selective memory, poor comprehension. I don't know. It's like the guy watched a totally different movie. He must have gotten tickets to Marty Deluxe. Now, unfortunately, that does mean in order to address any of Anthony's points, I will be getting squarely into spoiler territory. So with that warning out of the way, let's get into it.
Yes. Give yourselves a hand. Give yourselves a hand, because we all just survived one of the most relentless film promo cycles of the 2020s. That would be for the new Josh Safdie film, Marty Supreme, starring none other than Timothée Chalamet.
Anthony spends the first 2 minutes of his review complaining about Marty Supreme's supposedly apocalyptically overbearing marketing campaign, and I gotta say, I don't get this point at all. I obviously can't speak for everyone else's experience, but I honestly didn't hear about this movie until maybe a couple weeks ago, and that was mostly word of mouth. Going into the movie, I hadn't even seen a trailer. Now, it could be that I live under a rock. However, I think the more likely explanation for these two very different experiences is Anthony's well-known Twitter addiction. Seriously, this guy is tweeting and retweeting all damn day. Also, it becomes obvious throughout this review that Anthony has a massive hate boner for Timothée Chalamet, so I'm sure any Timmy-related content is pushed directly into his feed to harvest rage engagement. Regardless of our differing experiences and exposure to the marketing, I just think it's ridiculous that Anthony would suggest Marty Supreme is even in the top 10 when it comes to heavily marketed films of the 2020s. Especially when Wicked for Good, which came out 2 months ago, has a marketing budget double that of Marty Supreme's entire production. Seriously, my Roku City has been the yellow brick road since November.
And while Marty as a character does have interesting baseline characteristics, like the fact that he is an internationally competitive ping pong player, we get no sense of how he came to this talent, how he maintains it, and he puts no real value on it himself throughout the movie. Again, he barely works at any point to hone it, and he thinks nothing of cheapening it for the worst kind of short-term gain.
First off, this is untrue. We get a training scene with Tyler, the Creator, very early into the film. Marty literally invents a new colored ball to address what he feels is an issue with a technical aspect of the sport, and we see him spending God knows how long touring with the Harlem Globetrotters and performing trick shots alongside a former ping pong champion. Even after all this, in the week leading up to the tournament, we hear Marty bemoaning the loss of time he could have spent practicing while at the New Jersey gas station with Rachel. Blatant inaccuracy aside, I find it interesting that Anthony views Marty's status as a professional table tennis player as his defining characteristic, or at least the characteristic most deserving of the script's consideration. Personally, I consider occupations and hobbies to be a little lower level, a shallow, uninteresting characteristic that really can't tell you much. For instance, Leon and Anton Chigurh are both professional hitmen. However, they're very different people who share little more than a job title. In my view, Anthony is so caught up in the ping pong premise that he fails to see Marty's actual defining characteristic, which is that of a ruthless hustler. Anthony complains that Marty seems dispassionate about ping pong and willing to cheapen the sport for short-term gain, which makes a lot of sense to me. Watching the film, I got the impression that while Marty may have some passion for table tennis, he's not a reverent person by nature, and primarily views the sport as a vehicle to elevate himself, fuel his ego, and afford luxuries such as lavish hotel stays and fine dining. He's an opportunist who's latched onto ping pong as his most viable path to attain greatness. Having played sports both in community leagues and throughout high school, I've seen many talented athletes who gravitated towards a specific sport simply because it was the peg that fit them best. Sometimes people love a sport because they're good at it, naturally better than other people, and like the feeling of winning. Had Marty had a natural talent at checkers that he could exploit for fame, fortune, and personal gratification, I'm sure he'd be doing that instead. To look at this from a different angle, it is worth noting that the real-life Marty picked up a paddle at age 9 and was a City League junior champion by 13. These sort of young prodigies often seemingly take their skills for granted because acquisition came early and easy. In my favorite biographical drama, Amadeus 1984, Mozart is portrayed as a hedonistic man-child who thwarts his own career at every given opportunity and drinks himself into a pauper's grave. The juxtaposition between Mozart's seemingly divine talent and the deep character flaws that ultimately prevent him from reaching his full potential are what drive the narrative. I don't think that movie would be improved by additional scenes of Mozart clearly stating his passion and reverence for composition, in the same way that I don't think Marty Supreme would be improved by extended training montages and interior dialogue to make sure that viewers like Anthony know that the guy who's monomaniacally driven to play ping pong does indeed like ping pong.
He only seems to care about it to the extent that he can leverage it to inflate his ego. And I do simply mean inflate his ego, because while Marty is obviously super talented, he's also a stupid fuck, manipulative enough to get everyone around him to do exactly what he wants them to do by sheer riz alone, but too stupid to strategize well enough to make any of these manipulations benefit him in any meaningful way. Because even when Marty does get what he wants at the end of the movie, the win is hollow because he went about attaining it in the stupidest way possible.
This is the part of Anthony's review that gets really weird, and that he seems to have forgotten a lot of the plot. It is true that Marty is an effective manipulator, capable of skating by on his charisma, fast thinking, and good looks. However, these powers of manipulation fail consistently, and often at the most consequential moments. To name a few, Marty fails to manipulate his Uncle Murray, who takes the money he had set aside to go to Japan. He fails to manipulate the mobster Ezra Mishkin and walks away from a shootout that nearly takes the life of his unborn child with a few bills and paper clippings. He fails to manipulate Dion, who ultimately kicks Marty and Rachel out of his parents' home. He fails to manipulate the tournament official Ram Sethi, who doesn't let him compete. Does successfully manipulate Kay Stone, but fails the speech check at Central Park with the cops and ends up walking away empty-handed. You could argue that Marty does manipulate Milton Rockwell into paying his way to Japan. However, the deal ultimately falls through and Marty doesn't get his tournament fees paid. And I don't even understand what Anthony wants here. Marty's poor decision-making and the resulting consequences are the conflict that drive the narrative and build tension. Like, would he prefer a movie where Marty makes mature, sensible decisions, takes the promotion at the shoe store, moves in with his mother to save money for the tournament, practices ping pong at nights and on the weekends, eats his vegetables, takes his Jewish faith more seriously? That doesn't sound like a very fun movie, Anthony.
And the table tennis scenes themselves, while they are some of the most interesting moments in the movie, the way they're shot and edited does kind of lack a certain level of intimacy. I mean, they're about as engrossing as the ping pong scenes from Forrest Gump.
I mean, this is just disingenuous. Maybe Anthony is being hyperbolic for comedic effect, but the ping pong scenes in Forrest Gump are like 3 static medium shots of stiff gameplay where we don't even follow the outcome. Meanwhile, Marty Supreme has Timothée Chalamet dripping in sweat, practically throwing his arm out to pull off trick shots, feints, and epic long-distance saves. He literally plays against a fucking seal, Anthony. What more do you want?
Which is why I felt disheartened by this feeling that I was tired of seeing Marty's narcissistic ass on the screen by the time we hit the final match. Why is this, you may ask? Well, Marty as a person is kind of a massive piece of shit, which isn't inherently a bad thing. I mean, sometimes evil does win, and I do occasionally love an anti-hero. But the thing is, Marty Supreme never forces Marty to reckon with his bad behavior, his evil ways, through either an inner dialogue or voice or any kind of serious consequences for his actions. Actually, the plot and characters in this movie just straight up reward Marty for 2 hours horrors as he develops into a shittier and shittier person. When I say shitty, I truly do mean shitty, but also ineffective, because I think the only thing that prevents him from enacting the greatest horrors we've ever seen projected onto a silver screen is the fact that he essentially spends the film being too irrelevant and powerless to create any large-scale damage.
First off, the Walter White comparison is wild to me. Like, sure, Marty is a narcissistic asshole who consistently acts selfishly to the detriment of others. But Walt is a drug lord who kills people? These are two kind of different things. And what was Fantano even trying to insinuate there at the end with the whole Marty being too ineffective to enact real lasting damage? Is he suggesting that if Marty would have just played his cards right, he would have started the Fourth Reich? It's a tennis movie, man. And again, this just comes down to Anthony fundamentally misunderstanding the plot. If you've seen the movie, how is its end a win state for Marty? In what way is he materially rewarded? Sure, he's able to eke out a win against Endo, which I'm sure is very personally gratifying, but this win is in an unsanctioned exhibition match hosted by a US pen company. He isn't paid for the match, he isn't allowed to compete in the tournament, he isn't showered with accolades by the press. He ends up right back where he started, with no money, no guaranteed career in table tennis, and he owes Tyler, the creator, money for his messed up cab. You could argue that in a holistic sense, Marty is given the greatest reward of all, that being a newborn child that seems to have awakened a new level of love and compassion. But from a purely goals perspective, Marty strikes out a lot.
Again, what makes this movie awful isn't just that Marty is a bad guy, it's that the film itself and the progression of events essentially okays this behavior and says, yeah, that's fine. If you just like repeatedly act this way forever, it'll all work out.
It didn't really work out that well. What more consequences do you want for this guy, Anthony? You want somebody to shoot him? That aside, since when is a strong moral compass a prerequisite for success in athletics? You don't think anyone in the NFL, UFC, or NBA has some behavioral issues or managed to make it to the top despite being kind of a bad guy?
So yeah, going into this movie, the message, believe me, is not like, get inspired, be determined, hone a talent, and then one day you can dream big and be at the top of the world. No, the message is more like, hey, if you didn't know, you could basically force and riz your way through any situation so long as you're coercive enough and callous enough to just push people into the things you want them to do.
I don't know what to say, Anthony. If you went into a movie made by the guy who made Uncut Gems and Good Time expecting Karate Kid Ping Pong Edition, that's kind of your fault. Much of this review seems like it's about the film subverting Anthony's very misguided expectations. And it's a bizarre situation I think is completely unique to him. Like, I seriously doubt anyone who's familiar with Josh Safdie's previous works went into the movie expecting the traditional hard work and determination sports drama that Anthony apparently wanted. And by the way, this is a formula we've seen hundreds of times now. If that's really what you wanted, you could just stay home and rewatch the Rocky movies.
And not only is there never a moment where he stops to think about his actions, but also he's never really told no either, or he never hears a no that he doesn't instantaneously turn into a yes.
I feel like I'm repeating myself here, but again, that's just flat out untrue. Marty's entire goal for the whole movie is to get to Tokyo and compete in the tournament. He is unable to achieve this goal because he is told no by Ram Sethi. He's not able to pivot this no into a yes. He's not able to subvert this decision through Riz. It's over. Despite all his hustling, that opportunity completely off the table.
The only true bit of comeuppance that Marty sees throughout the entire movie comes at the hands of Kevin O'Leary. Yes, that Kevin O'Leary.
This is fantastic news, and of course I applaud it. What can be wrong with this?
Really?
Who essentially saunters into this film to play himself, which is ironic given that there is like kind of a line that Gwyneth Paltrow delivers that sort of a shot at the idea of method acting at one point, and yet you hired a capitalist dipshit to play a capitalist dipshit, and I guess paid this man to come on set and deliver some Shark Tank vibes.
This last point is obviously stupid and the last one I'm going to address, but I think it perfectly encapsulates how sloppy and ill-conceived this review is? I'm sure no one else needs to be told this, but that's not what method acting is. When Benny Safdie cast real-life mixed martial artist Ryan Bader to play Mark Coleman in The Smashing Machine, Ryan's entire career in Bellator didn't retroactively become an exercise in method acting. It's called stunt casting, and this is just so dumb because Anthony was served up such an easy dunk here. Because the star of Marty Supreme, Timothée Chalamet, is a method actor who's been recently dragged in the media for his frankly absurd immersion techniques. I guess that's one Chalamet fact that did not make it onto Fantano's Twitter feed. Okay, well that's really all that there is worth addressing in this review. The world's busiest music nerd basically spends 15 minutes spinning his wheels and working off of a premise that really only works if you're someone who hasn't seen the movie. I'm not saying this film's above criticism by any means, I just think Anthony's takes were lazy, shallow, and really not grounded in the plot of the film. I don't know, maybe he should have sat on it a little bit longer or at least did a Google search to make sure he's not saying a bunch of dumb shit. It's just bad content. Since we're still close to New Year, I'd say maybe some potential resolutions for Anthony. Maybe take a little break from Twitter, pick up a book, because currently the plot retention and comprehension, a little rough, pal. Stick to music reviews, melon.